Hello, everybody.
Yes.
I have a piece of paper because I like paper. Okay. So my name is Myrriah Gossett. It is pronounced Myrriah, not Myrriah. It has a Y. I have hippies for parents. You can blame them. I would like to thank Sarah, who's interviewing for me tonight. I appreciate you so much. So I make podcasts for a living. I know, crazy. And I don't work for NPR, even crazier. Crazy, I know. Bananas. Anyway, so I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about the process of what goes into making a podcast. And you might be like, but this is like Valentine's Day. Why is this lady talking to us about podcasts? I'm going to talk about specifically making podcasts that talk about intimacy, get into some sexy stories, get into, I have to over-enunciate this, audio erotica, as in for your ears. So we're going to talk about a lot of these things. I'm going to get into some of the processes that go into making some of your favorite podcasts. You might have heard of Bedpost Confessions, which takes place here. So I stage manage for them, and I also produce their podcast, and it is a dream. So I tell stories for a living. It's incredible. It's a huge privilege that I get to have to help people tell other folks their story. I think a lot about like the data we just heard about folks living with AIDS and HIV, and a big way that we learn about data as humans is to take it in as stories. It's one of the oldest methods we have, and it's a way to effectively communicate information between other humans, your partner, your spouses, all of these things. Storytelling can be a really effective way to communicate your needs and desires. So a lot of people, let's just raise your hand if you've ever had an idea for a podcast. Right? Yeah, half of you. So I charge $45 an hour. You can talk to me after the show. And I also teach a class at Austin School of Film, and I'll give you some data about that later. Love Austin School of Film. So here's some questions I pose to people when they say, I have this great idea for a podcast. First question, what story do you want to tell? Is it your story? Is it the story of another person that you know? Is it your family? And why do you want to tell it? If you can't answer those two questions, then you don't actually have a podcast idea. Even if you want to sit around with your friends and talk about nerd stuff. I love nerd stuff. I'm also a co-host on a Star Trek podcast, so you know I love nerd stuff. The other thing to think about is what other shows are out there that are like this, right? There are over 750,000 podcasts available in the iTunes store today. Probably more as I'm talking, are being uploaded right now. I think there was a stat I saw the other day on Twitter that you could listen to a different episode of a different podcast every day, and it would take you over 10 years to listen to all of the podcasts. It's a lot out there. So what makes your show different? Why are you the person to tell this story? Why is this show important? With everything that is out there, why? Why is always my biggest question. And specifically, why are you the right person to tell this story? So at Bedpost Confessions, we get stories from people who are telling deep personal questions, and they're telling deep personal stories. And they're letting you into their lives, and that's why they are the right person to tell you that story. I think, so I work on a show, it's in pre-production right now, it's called Fat and Black in Texas. And so the person who hosts it is fat and black and lives in Texas. Makes sense, right? And that's an important story to tell. And the other thing is to think about who is your audience, right? So being a person who works on a Star Trek podcast, there's obviously a lot of Star Trek out in the world. But the reason we do it is our panel includes a person who's never watched Star Trek before. So he's our litmus test. And we have a range of knowledge on the panel. And we also used to have a co-host, and now she works for NASA. So we're cool people. But the reason we did this is we wanted to be accessible. We wanted to talk to people who are maybe new to fandom and not be people who are going to yell at you when you don't know the difference between a Romulan and a Vulcan, right? So the other thing to note is podcasting is really hard. It takes a lot of work. Adam Maurer, who's going to be talking later, I'm going to play a clip of his podcast in just a little bit, it probably takes us 2 to 3 hours of studio time, plus 2 to 3 hours of editing, and then promotion. And that's just for a show where 2 people talk and sometimes they interview someone. So it's a lot of effort. So it has to be something that you love, So because we're talking about love, you have to love what you're talking about or else you're gonna abandon it. Over 50% of podcasts put in the iTunes store are abandoned after 6 episodes because people realize it's a lot of work. So I get the question a lot of like, how do I become the next Terry Gross, or how do I become the next This American Life? You have to be really good at what you do. So the formula that I say is that goes across all podcasts that actually are successful. It's not saying if you have all 3 of these things, you're going to be successful. I'm just saying this is their common denominators. It's a good story, the audio quality is good, and you consistently put it out, right? Okay. So there are a variety of shows. So just a small plug, these are 2 shows that I work on. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. And you've probably heard a lot of these types of shows. So there's interviews, there's roundtables, daily news. Daily news people are bananas. They work so hard. I met a woman who works on a daily show, and she goes to work from 3 a.m. until 7 a.m. in the morning. Bananas. There's listicles, there's advice, there's recaps, there's episodic documentaries, seasonal documentaries, investigation magazine. A good example of a magazine show, because I get this question a lot, is it just means you kind of explore whatever you want in different formats. So if anyone listens to Nancy from WNYC, that's a good example of a magazine show. There's game shows like Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. There's narrated short stories, and then there's serial fiction. If anyone's looking for a really good, sexy serial fiction show that just came out, there's one called Moonface, and it's incredible, and you should listen to it. The sound design is dope. So, all of these show types. The last thing I wanted to talk about that's not on this list, but it's fairly new to the game, are there new apps for that audio erotica, as I was talking about, where you can have porn for your earbuds. It's really, there's a variety of them. You can set what kind of mood you're in, what kind of interaction between people you want to listen to. There's a company called Dipsia that's putting them out right now. Very high quality, very into them. A little expensive, but you should pay for good quality content. You pay for Netflix, pay for porn. Pay for porn. Okay. So y'all want to hear about some sexy stories, getting personal. I think the reason shows like Bedpost Confessions and shows like Adams and other shows that I've worked on where people get really personal is that they're willing to get personal. So if you are interested in making a show where you talk about sex and you talk about your life, you also have to learn how to set your own boundaries. So if you want to talk about the sex that you have with your spouse, you should probably ask your spouse if they want their name on that. And you should provide real and viable information. So if you do want to talk about sex, it'd be really great to have all the data like we just saw in the earlier presentation if any of that information comes up. So you are providing the most up-to-date and real information because this all lives on the internet and we should be making sure we are fact-checking ourselves. And the other thing is to do it well and to get permission from people you're talking to. So if you are interviewing people about their sex lives, make sure they know this is going out into the world and make sure they know what you're going to clear and what you're going to provide to your listeners. So boundaries, just like in relationships, are very important in podcasting. I've also worked on Scene with Miranda Wiley, if anyone's listened to that show. She talks a lot about identity and identity politics on that show, and there's some really deep and personal and intimate conversations. And the reason we're able to get that tape, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit, is that she's willing to provide boundaries for the person she's interviewing, as well as providing her own boundaries to me as her editor. So if she gives me a personal story because she's trying to maybe get some extra juicy stuff from the person she's interviewing, she'll let me know what needs to be cut out. And so that's why it's very important to know not only what your host boundaries are, but your guest boundaries are and any person that you're talking to. Now, if you want to go into some narrative fiction and get really sexy with it, like some of this audio porn, you should make sure that the people who are coming to voice act for you know that too. And we're going to talk about some mic technique later for how to capture moans. It's very fun. Very hot. Okay, so the biggest thing I want to leave with you today, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, is please, for the love of God, tell a good story and structure it and write it and edit it and rewrite it and re-edit it. So I work on a lot of interview shows, and I still use this format to construct an interview. And if any of you listen to Mark Maron, he is edited. I said it, he is edited. He has a producer, his name is Brandon, and he's very good at what he does. So, the way this works for a show like Maron, and I have some slides with resources, they talk about this publicly, so I'm not like letting a total cat out of the bag. But the way this works is we want to take people on a journey on your podcast. So if you've ever watched, I'm assuming people here like Star Wars, right? You can fit all of Star Wars on this circle. You can fit every episode of Rick and Morty on this circle. You can fit every episode of the new Star Trek Picard on this circle, because I've done it this week. So, you want to take people into your world. What world do you bring them into as you're telling them this story? And then you have to give them a call of adventure. So this could be the moment someone hits a crossroads, right? And they're going to be like, no, I don't want to do that thing. It's fine. But then they meet Obi-Wan Kenobi and they have to go. And that's when you cross the threshold, right? So you're leaving the ordinary world, hitting the special world. Almost every episode of This American Life can also be charted out on this. This is The Hero's Journey. It's by Joseph Campbell. It's been around for a long, long time. You can also think of this as a 3-act structure. I think this has a laser thing. Right, so this is Act 1, this is Act 2, and then this is Act 3. So depending on how your brain thinks, you can construct it in any which way. And this works too for interviews. So when you're interviewing someone, to make my job as an editor easier, this is how I prefer to construct it, is you get your basic information about your person, where are they from, where did they come from, what's their ordinary world, and then you're gonna get that piece of information of why you're doing this story about them, what makes them interesting. Then you're probably gonna find out that there is a reason they didn't wanna do what they did, or some sort of conflict is happening here. And then they're gonna deal with a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And that's all of this. So it could be tests, allies, enemies. It could be, they got a promotion at work and that's changed some things, or they asked for more money at work. All of these things happen within this circle. But on the other side, you have to end with them either changing or remaining the same, and you have to explain why. So if they've remained the same, why did they remain the same? If they've changed, why did they change? How did they return? What was the elixir? If we're going back to old Joseph Campbell. Okay, I think this is where I have an audio sample, but I'm going to check because I don't want to scare you all with audio. Piece of paper. Okay. Yes. All right. So this is a trailer for Me and My Gorgeous Husband, which is hosted by Adam Maurer and A Gorgeous Husband. And they talk about their life as a married couple and what that means to them. And then they also interview a bunch of really great sex-positive people on the show, and you should check it out. But here's a trailer that I've constructed using points along this circle to make it interesting for you. Maybe. We can all dance along to the music.
Sean, we're actually doing it.
Yeah, fine. We've been led around like donkeys with apples on sticks.
Oh my gosh. So welcome everybody to Me and My Gorgeous Husband. My name is Adam Maurer. I'm a sex-positive therapist, straight friendly, and I'm here to make the world a little bit more sexual, like awesome, sexually awesome. Myrriah, can you cut that out, please?
No.
And Michelle, like, what brings you here?
I have no discernible talents or qualities, no real background.
So what would you say is like some of the worst and best advice that you have heard about talking about sex with young folks, or just talking about sex with a partner even?
So yeah. I heard from one of my students that ejaculate reduces the chances of breast cancer. Swallowing ejaculate.
You're like, whose boyfriend taught you that?
Like, thank God I'll never have to worry about breast cancer.
Boyfriend taught her that.
Yeah.
And when I pulled out like the medical research that disproved this theory that she brought in, she cried.
Who's this person?
Oh, McCray Game, a man who started a conversion therapy foundation called Hope for Wellness, just recently came out as gay and has released an apology for all the damage he has done.
So what is your favorite porn parody?
I don't know if I'm into parody. Like when it comes to porn, I mean, there's a lot that are interesting down, especially since I like animation so much. When I hear
you just told on yourself.
an American Dad or a
They do.
a Rick and Morty, they sound like they'd be interesting, and then you watch them and they're terrifying. There's things that they
So if you could make a parody of any show that was going to be made into a porn, what would you choose? Yeah, but if you can't negotiate consent and be sexy, girl, you need to come see me for therapy because I will teach you. Like that's like 101.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
But I feel like
Mariah, can you make a
I can't
trophy for that?
so upset with myself for saying that while being recorded.
And this is Me and My Gorgeous Husband, a podcast about sex, love, relationships, dating, and married life.
Yeah. Sold it.
So, thank you. So you can kind of see even loosely in a trailer how this story was constructed, right? So I introduced you to Adam and Michonne. You got to go a little bit about their banter and their history. We brought in some of their allies and the people that they're working with. We brought in some of the information that is going to provide change for our audience members. And then as we got to the end, we got to see that they, on the other side, have some change that's happening within their relationship and how that they are functioning within that. So you can literally use it for anything. And if anyone else writes, it's a great tool to use to help get unstuck if you have a little writer's block. Okay, so all of that tape was recorded in a studio, which is super helpful and makes my job really easy as a producer and an editor. But some things that you need to think about, even if you are in a good sound recording space, is getting good tape. And by getting, when I say tape, obviously I don't have an actual tape deck anymore. I did actually learn how to physically cut tape in the olden days of college. It's not fun. It's not fun. It's very tedious. That's what Scotch tape was invented for, by the way. So some things if you want to get good tape from people you're interviewing, and this is also an interesting thing to think about if you're communicating with a partner or friends or other relationships that maybe you need to have a hard conversation about. I don't recommend actually sending full questions. You can send subjects and things that you want to talk about, what topics you want to touch on so that they can prepare, especially if there's some sort of expert. You want to make sure that they are prepared with the data they want to share with you. But if you send them questions early, they're going to prep specific answers to those questions and they're going to sound rehearsed. So especially like we just came out of award season, right? All the Oscars and all that stuff, and every person got asked the same question. Taika Waititi, what inspired you to write Jojo Rabbit? My mom in a book. He said the same thing every time. So get interesting, have some good topics, and then ease people into your conversation, especially if they're not people who regularly talk about themselves. People say they like talking about themselves, but you put a microphone in front of them and it gets real awkward real fast. So get comfortable with them, ask them some easy questions. It's tape you're not going to use in the end. Like, how was your day? I ask people what they had for breakfast as a way to figure out if my mic levels are okay. But it's something to just like put them at ease. They're not going to start thinking about the microphone in front of them. You want to make it as conversational as possible. Some other things, questions that you should not ask. What is it like to be a woman in blank? Podcasting industry, comedy. They are that person, so you don't need to designate their gender or identity when you're asking that question. Just ask them what their experience is. You're going to get way better answers, because I know every time I've ever been asked, what's it like being a woman in audio production? I'm just like, why does it matter that I'm a woman in audio production? I'm just a person in audio production. Gender is a myth. Okay. Another question I hate hearing as a mom, how do you balance it all? You would never ask a dad that question. So how about get more creative? Like hustle culture has kind of become the norm. What do you do to make a space for yourself, right? What's the deeper question you're trying to ask? Go farther. And then there's differences, right? So there's conversations and there's formal interviews. I like to think of this as the Mark Maron versus the Terry Gross, right? So Terry Gross has very produced questions. She's going to ask very specific things, whereas Mark Maron's going to go on a couple of tangents. But they both have editors, and that is the reason why. So when you do these interviews and you've compiled it all, you then can cut all of those pieces up and put it into the story format. You can also try to think about your questions within that story format as well. How are you going to construct the story through the interview? But if you get into a deep conversation and it happens and there's some really good tape in there and it went places you didn't think it was going to go, like golden gems, great, wonderful, cut it up, put it back in the story format, because your listeners are going to appreciate that, because it's going to be much easier to follow and for them to take in all of the information that you want them to know. Okay, sensitive subject matter. So we've talked a bit about this, but permission is really important. If you're talking about children, if you're talking about anything to do with people's body autonomy, you want to make sure that they are comfortable with what they're sharing with you. You want to get their permission. You want to get forms signed that they gave you permission to talk about this or get it on tape. Be really clear what is on and off the record with people. So if at any point they seem a little wary, be like, hey, just double checking, is this all okay to keep on tape, right? Adam, there's that piece where Adam jokingly says, Myrriah, can you please cut that? But I always make sure I actually know what needs to get cut and what doesn't need to get cut. Usually the funny stuff gets left in. I like thinking about it, if it was your story, what would you want left in? Right? That's a great way to think about this if you're constructing a story or working on a podcast. Same thing if you're just working on a conversation with your spouse or significant other. What if it was you? Think about it. And what are you sharing and what are you showing? So this gets into some audio production stuff, but if you are walking into a bar, it's probably more effective to get the sound of the door than saying, I walked into a bar. So think about creative storytelling with audio. And so this gets into some fun microphone stuff. So things people don't think about when they're going to, if any of you want to make a podcast and you hire an editor, these are things that are gonna make your life easier, their life easier, and all of the work a lot cheaper if you have to pay for it, or if you're just learning it yourself. So room tone is literally the sound of the room. So if I was to take room tone in here, I'd ask everyone to be really quiet and I would just awkwardly stare at you for 30 seconds while I get the sound of what the room sounds like. But we use that to help transition between pieces. So if I recorded an interview in this space and then I was transitioning into an interview that was done in a studio, you use that little piece of room tone to help transition people's ears. It's much nicer. You can also use it, let's say, there's a hum coming from the bar right now, and if I wanted to take that hum out of whatever interview I was using, you can use room tone to edit it out. Magic of Adobe. So the other thing is how can you help set the scene, and this gets into some of that fun audio porn or into some erotica, is if you have a hookup that's happening at a bar, there better be that bass sound that's coming from the back, right? There better be sounds of glasses and drinks being poured and make me feel like I'm in the bar. If it's something that's like a hookup at a park, where are the nature sounds? Give me birds chirping. But don't go overboard. So you don't need if it's the condom wrapper. You probably don't need all of the condom wrapper coming off. You can just have a little bit of crinkle sound and we get it. Or just someone being like, do you have a condom? And then I don't need the sound. So think about it. Wet sounds, you don't want it to become a total ASMR situation. Foley work is some of my favorite. I love recording weird sounds. I go outside, I take hikes, I record random things. It's super fun and weird. Nighttime in parks is very loud, just FYI. But yeah, don't go overboard. Think about how you can really bring someone into a story. I was listening to one the other day that had two women hooking up and they were using a vibrator and they had the sound of the vibrator in there and it was very effective. Very effective. So think about those things when you're going into storytelling, whether it is sexy or not sexy. It all is necessary. It could be super helpful in creating a more robust sound and bringing your listener into your space. Things about music, I always plug this anytime there's newbie podcasters or wannabe podcasters. Do not use top 40 music. You will get sued. You will pay a fine. You will have to hire a lawyer. It is not fun. There's plenty of free music websites out there. YouTube has a huge library. Or we are in Austin, Texas. Talk to a musician.
Yeah!
Get some music and pay them for it.
Yeah!
Yeah. But yeah, be careful. Licenses are important. and that fast talking that's at the end of commercials. I am not a lawyer. I cannot give you legal advice, and these are all the things. Okay. I like asking people questions. Does anyone know what is sound?
Vibration through a medium.
Vibration through a medium, very close. I'm looking for a singular word.
Wave.
It's a wave, yes. So it literally works. If I clap my hands, it would go back to the back of this room. This used to be a sound stage, so it's actually probably would die somewhere in here because it's made to record sound in here. But think about this when you're going to record. If it's you and your friends sitting around a microphone and you want to have a podcast talking about Star Trek, soundproof the room. Put some rugs down, blankets up. I've recorded in so many closets. It works. Your clothes are great soundproofers. You can also, if you're ever in a hotel at a con, you can get under a blanket and turn off the AC and shove a towel underneath the door and maybe go into the bathroom, and it works well. So you can soundproof yourself. You can go to a studio. You want to make sure you're producing your stuff. It gets really nitty-gritty, but you want to make your stuff really sound well, record in WAV versus MP3. If anyone else there is a sound nerd, maybe I'll have to do another talk on just sound. This might have to happen. And then use good recording equipment. It helps. It's gonna make your job easier later when you are editing. Okay, let's go make stuff. Is really what I want to tell people. This was me working on an outdoor show. It's a FOGO, fear of going outside. It's a nature show with the world's most reluctant nature host. I went out and recorded a woman camping for the first time for 48 hours in Texas in July. It was fun. She thought I was gonna die. I hiked backwards. She was convinced. We lived, obviously. But you can subscribe to that as well. I love sources, and I love that the libraries here, they brought some of my favorite books. Here's the full list of the books. You can take a picture of this slide if you like. There's lots of great things. If you're really nerdy and want to get to know more about podcasting, I highly recommend a website called transom.org. It's where all the NPR people tell you all their secrets. It's great. So you get to learn NPR without having to go work at NPR. Air Media is an organization for audio folks, so if you're interested in this field, it's a great place to learn about rates, how much stuff costs. They're sort of our union without being a union, but they negotiate our prices with NPR every year, and I love them for it. So thank you to Air Media. There's lots of other, let me just tell you this though. There's a lot of people in garages with shitty microphones who are gonna tell you how to make a podcast on YouTube. Don't listen to them. Go to Transom. They know what they're doing. Finally, some episodes that I really enjoy. Episode 1000 from Mark Maron talks about their full process. I find it fascinating because everyone used to tell me, like, I just want to have a podcast like Mark Maron. I just want to like talk to people, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be a conversation. It's gonna be wonderful. And I'm just like, they edit it. Anyway, they edit it. Editors are great. Startup from Gimlet Media, season 1 is about how they started a podcasting company. Zigzag Podcast is also about how they started a podcast company. One is from some men and one is from some women. It's very interesting. The men just sold their company for a few $1 billion. Why is that? Locally, if you want to talk, I'm on this podcast. It's called Create Pod ATX. It's me and some local producers, and we talk specifically about how to make independent podcasts. So if that's something you're interested in, you can also do that. And then Work It Festival is from WNYC. It is for women and non-binary folks. It's a conference every year, but they put up all of their talks online for free. It's great. And finally, my next class. So normally I do this talk over 2 days. And there's a lot of more slides. So if you want to hear the whole thing, I'm teaching it May 2nd and 3rd at the Austin School of Film. You can register. They usually have a coupon code for like 20% off, so it ends up being about $200 for a full weekend class. I think it's a great deal. You can find me at all of the socials at Myrriah Gossett. It's Myrriah with a Y. Or shoot me an email. And yeah, now I'm ready for questions.
All right, y'all. I wonder if y'all are going to be naughty or nice. Who has the first question? Yes, I'm excited to find out too. Balcony. Oh, that was helpful. All right, what you got?
So if one had a garage and one wanted to convert it for sound to a podcast, What steps would one take?
If one wants to soundproof one's garage, how would one go about that? For podcasting purposes, presumably.
Yes. Okay, so you want to, I mean, who knows with this one?
Consider the theme.
So for both sex and for podcast, soundproofing is very similar. I would say probably more targeted, but what you really need for audio is to deaden the sound. So you want to put up what are called bass traps in the corner. You can look that up. There's lots of websites that sell like rolls and rolls of foam that you can put up, but you can also use like egg crates. If you have friends with chickens, you've got a lot of egg crates sitting around, you can put those up on the wall. I did that once with, I used to work at a soap store in college, and we had all our bath bombs came in egg crates, and so I put them up on the walls. My closet smelled incredible. And it was soundproof. Thick rugs on the ground. You want to make sure you're reducing noise coming in from outside, so blocking out windows. You can also just get like canvases and cover them with like thick fabric and put those in the windows, and then just hang curtains. Cheap way to do that, yeah.
Perfect timing. All right, so we have a question from the Twitter. And the question is, how do we make podcasts more accessible for hard of hearing and deaf people?
That is a great question. You can transcribe your podcast. I use a service called otter.ai. It has nothing to do with the other kind of otters. And otter.ai, you put in your audio, it will transcribe it for you, pretty close to perfect, and then you can fix it. I will say it does have a hard time with anyone who might have a slightly different accent from standard English. However, it does a pretty decent job, and then you can go in and correct it. I always appreciate when podcasts put up transcriptions, because sometimes I'm editing a podcast and I can't listen to it, but I want to read some of the information. So you can transcribe it, have your transcriptions ready on your website. You can link to them in your show notes. I think it's super important to do that for accessibility of information.
All right, we're 2 for 2 on excellent questions. This is exciting. And everybody's acting right, I appreciate it. Ooh, what would you, another balcony? I don't know what it is about the balcony. All right, what you got?
What audio editing?
Audio editing software, what do you use?
So I learned on Pro Tools, but I currently edit in Adobe Audition because it's cheaper per month.
All right, good pragmatic question. What else do you have? Do I see some hands over? Okay, I see people pointing at somebody.
Yeah, the black hoodie.
All right, what you got?
Yeah.
How did you apply the hero's journey to podcasting?
Yes. So I also screenwrite in my spare time, and I found it to be such a useful tool in screenwriting that I just started applying it when I was working on podcasts. And then as I was listening to podcasts, after applying it to my own work, I was like, oh, everyone's been doing this all along. I think everyone, I mean, literally on This American Life, they stated, they're like, in Act 1, we will be doing this. Coming up in Act 2, this is Ira Glass. So I figured if they can get away with it, so can I. Might as well use the tools of the trade. So yeah, and there's a really fun YouTube video. It's called Every Story is the Same. I play it in my class, and it breaks it down, like using examples like Star Wars, Die Hard, books, like all these things, talking about how literally every story is constructed the same because it's how we all take in information in storytelling. You can obviously play with it and manipulate it. There's lots of things that start with Act 3 and then jump to Act 2, but I think if you can work within that structure, you learn a really great way to tell a story, and then you can know the rules before you fuck with the rules, right? So.
All right, we've got time for one more question. I'm going to pull this one from Twitter. What's the strategically optimal length of an episode, and is there an optimal day, time, or frequency of release?
The short answer is no. The longer episode is typically what I have found is if an episode of a podcast is between 30 minutes and an hour, that is the average commute or workout time, and that is usually when people are listening to podcasts, so that's what I shoot for. I think it has to be very compelling content to go over an hour. I don't think you can hold people's attention that long. anymore. They're going to start scrolling, and then they're not even listening to what you're saying anymore. As far as a day of the week, I don't know. Right now, it seems like 80% of the podcasts I work on come out on Tuesdays, which make my Mondays terrible. But yeah, I don't think it matters. I think a lot of people tend to publish during the week because if you do this professionally, ideally you want to publish on the day you're actually working in case something goes wrong. But no, there's no magical formula for that. So.
All right. Thank you so much. This was marvelous.